or 4-pillar protocol for detox is to protect the body, open the detox pathways, mobilize the toxins, and bind the toxins. Mold toxins like zearalenone, they mimic estrogen. They can cause worsening estrogen dominance, or they can raise your estrogen levels. And if those toxins are interfering with those phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways, your hormones just aren't getting metabolized properly. And we really have to figure out where is this coming from so that we can rebalance those hormones. The whole piece of food may not be moldy. However, if you see mold, for example, like on one slice of bread, I consider the whole loaf to be contaminated. Some of the worst foods for mold are going to be your grains. Mold decreases your vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is a hormone. It affects your energy, it affects your mood, it affects your metabolism. All of these different vitamin, nutrient, hormone levels can all be disrupted by environmental toxin exposure. Getting those back in check can give people their lives back.
I am so excited, Dr. Diana, to have you on the Gut Check podcast today. As I was just mentioning, I have followed along with your work. I think just by means of introduction, let's just jump in and hear more about your background. And one thing that's common, thankfully, with many doctors these days is that you've made this jump from conventional medicine to functional medicine. You've written awesome books. So just tell us all about it, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Perfect, Caroline. Thank you so much for having me. So, I am a conventionally trained MD. I practiced in primary care for almost 10 years. I did a lot of pediatrics. I'm still board certified in pediatrics. And then as the years went on, I saw that this, healing that I had gone to med school to do wasn't really what I got as a regular doctor, what I could do. So that combined with, we had a mold issue in a rental home about 10 years ago now. Seems like forever ago, but it was a long time ago now. Thankfully, we've healed from that. But all these things and learning about how the conventional medical system doesn't do well to help people with environmental illness as well as gut health. Hello. Huge issues there in the conventional medical system going on with how they deal with gut health. So I decided to get out, and I now have my own practice, which is fully video visits, functional medicine and functional health. And I'm a mold literate practitioner. I have 3 published books and just launched our mold course.
Awesome. Congrats.
So thanks. So really just loving what I do now. I'm able to spend, so much longer with clients
Yeah.
and just diving into root causes and really seeing the actual breakthroughs that I went to med school to provide to people.
One of the things I've heard you say in the past too, which I didn't know, but isn't super shocking because we've talked about this so much with nutrition in med school. But I mean, during, traditional medical school, you're still really not touching on at all really around environmental toxins, things like mold. I was looking at some data ahead of this conversation, and it's somewhere between, is it 25 and 50% of buildings in the US have mold? Is that accurate?
Really, any building has the potential to have a mold issue. All
Wow.
buildings have a fungal ecology,
Yeah.
and there will not be any study that's going to accurately say at a given point in time the exact percentage of buildings that have a mold issue at this time, because it fluctuates widely. Because any water damage event, mold can grow within 24 to 48 hours.
Yep.
So the same buildings that have a mold issue today, there's going to be more tomorrow. Some people are going to discover mold today. It's going to fluctuate widely. But the studies that have been done, the percentages that have been found vary anywhere from the low end, the 20 something percentile, to 80 something percent of military housing in there, or military buildings in one study had mold issues. So there's always the potential there because mold grows so easily.
Yeah.
And with regard to the medical system not teaching about it, if you're a practitioner and you don't know about environmental illness, then you're behind. You're
Yeah.
behind, 10, 15, 20 years of research
Yeah.
that has just been continuing to come out on mold and how it affects human health and other environmental toxins too, right? I mean, there's the
Yeah.
microplastics, the environmental toxins like glyphosate and everything like that,
Yeah.
actinos, endotoxins, just the list goes on. And these are causing and contributing to symptoms in every single body system.
Mm.
So practitioners really need to become aware of them, because if you're missing them, then your patients and your clients are not, they're also missing them and they're not going to be healing right. So it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think, we'll talk about the hormone, aspect of this, women's health aspect of this, but there's, I think one of the harder things about mold too is there's so many symptoms that you could present with, right? And so then you present with these symptoms, and again, you've got this very limited amount of time to see a patient. And at the end of the day, kind of a limited amount of tools in the toolbox, whether it be a prescription or whatever it might be, right? So I want to get into the first book I think it was that you wrote was the book about gut health, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So the inner journey is a gut health handbook where we go all the way down the intestinal tract. So you'll
Yep.
have symptoms that relate to a certain organ in the digestive tract, and then the testing that you may want to ask for in order to
Mhm.
evaluate that. And then some natural treatments or supplements that may be useful, or interventions you can do at home, and then also things that may be more specialized, or maybe you have to go to a doctor to get, or maybe get a prescription or procedure done. A lot of times we'll say, okay, I have this symptom in my stomach, or I have
Right.
this symptom in my right side, or just where is your symptom, and then you kind of find that in the handbook, and then you can go from there. So I
Mm.
had not seen anything like that before, and really just wanted to go, have people be able to go from, where is my symptom? Okay, understand a little bit about, like, how can I evaluate this symptom? And if it's multiple areas, then just, refer to those multiple pages. So yeah, that was our first book, and I love just the layout of it for people. It's really user friendly.
From your work, from the patients you're seeing, what are the most misunderstood aspects of gut health right now?
So I think one of the hugest ones is the issue of stomach acid, like high stomach acid versus low stomach acid. So
Mm.
people say, okay, I have stomach pains or reflux symptoms. Go to the doctor, you get a proton pump inhibitor or
Mm.
reflux medication. So that may help you short term, but long term, those cause way more issues. So we really need to
Right.
figure out what is the actual issue going on there. Do you actually have high stomach acid? Because in far and away the majority of cases, it's actually low stomach acid that can cause or contribute to reflux symptoms.
Mm.
So, or even symptoms of IBS, things like that. Motility issues, so
Mm.
gut dysbiosis, which can be caused by environmental toxins.
Yep.
So it's not as common to actually have high stomach acid. So I like to have people do the baking soda test for stomach acid, which is
Okay.
pretty easy at home trick you can do to see if you actually have low stomach acid. So you put a fourth of a teaspoon of baking
Mm.
soda into at least 4 ounces of water, and you drink that on an empty stomach, ideally.
Mhm.
Then you actually time how long it takes for you to burp. And
Huh.
so, because that baking soda will react with your stomach acid
Yep.
and it will create gas, so carbon
Yep.
dioxide, that should happen pretty quickly. So, if that doesn't happen within a few minutes, then you're likely to have low stomach acid. And
Hmm.
we can actually figure out, the most important thing again is root cause, figuring out what's going on
Right.
there. Why do you have that? Is it stress? Stomach acid goes down with age, dysbiosis, or low or high bacteria in the microbiome, and what the cause behind that is for you. But also we can supplement the stomach acid in order to get that back into normal range, because the stomach pH is supposed to be very low. So
Yeah.
if that pH never gets there, then your food never gets digested properly.
Mhm.
And what else happens is it protects us against pathogens growing there. So people
Mm,
have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, but you can also have this overgrowth all the way up. You can even have overgrowth all
interesting.
the way up into your stomach if you've, for example, been taking acid blockers for years,
Mm,
decades, and more. I've seen people have been taking them for 20, 30 years because they
mm,
just kind of get left on them.
mhm.
And it causes really, really big issues that we then have to peel back, and we have to boost up that stomach acid in order that those pathogens that have just been having a heyday in your GI
Yeah.
tract then get killed off.
Just for to reiterate here, I mean, really none of this is taught in medical school, right? When you're going through the GI system and going through, I think, is that year 2 of med school? I think
Yeah, yeah, I believe it is.
I've got some doctors in the family, so I've asked them when they're in the GI, section
yeah.
what they're going through, but, um, yeah, I mean, why do you think that is? And I mean, is it just an oversight? Where do you think this goes? I mean, there's clearly more and more functional medicine coming to the surface, which is truly the only way to get ahead of this, but what do you think will happen long term? Because to your point, I mean, with, like, the acid blockers, such a good example of something that gets prescribed or otherwise, someone's told to take it and then, they wake up and it's been 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, so I have thought about this a lot.
Mhm.
Why was I not taught this in med school?
Mhm.
It seemed like a betrayal almost
Yeah,
because it was, you go to med school thinking that you're going to come out of it, especially top med schools like I went to, coming
yeah,
out of it with the knowledge that you need.
yep,
You go there for 4 years and you expect to get the knowledge that you need to care for people, but that's not entirely the case. So it seems almost like it was intentionally omitted. I mean, I'm not
mhm,
a conspiracy theorist, but I do know, how this stuff works as far as, the money side goes.
mm,
So I do think that it all comes down to, finances and who is influencing what gets taught. And,
mm,
these medications are so commonly prescribed. And so I think, I'm sure there's a lot of factors. Really, I can attest you're kind of just chasing your tail all day, seeing all these patients and then charting all night. And I
yeah,
barely had time to keep up with research while I was in the regular medical system in
yeah,
primary care because of that. So a lot of people are just really trapped in this rut of like doing what you've always done, and just forget about the fact that it's science that we're doing
yeah,
and we're scientists, and science is always evolving and
mhm,
changing. But mold research has come a long way in the past few decades, so I think it's just really not keeping up with the research.
yeah,
And it gets messy with regard to finances and, okay, who pays if the mold is found in the rental home and,
that's
or
right.
the new build or all of this stuff. So it really is, it just gets very messy very quickly.
Okay, so this happened to your family, obviously, and it sounds like the a lot of the research that you did on the gut microbiome and gut health was really inspired by your husband, right? And kind of trying to solve some of his issues. So personal experience with this, we just talked about how many houses. I mean, it's the number widely varying, but it's very common, I think, or at least fair to say common that a building, whether it's your workplace or a house, has some sort of mold. So let's dive into kind of the symptoms that someone would present with. And I know there's a lot of them, but the symptoms, and I know there's this overlap as well with gut health and GI symptoms. But if someone thinks that they might have been exposed to mold, or they're just really having a hard time identifying why they feel the way that they do, what are some of the things that they should be looking for when it pertains to mold and mold exposure symptoms?
Any unexplained medical symptom, I would say check into your environment.
Mhm.
So it can be causing or worsening your symptoms.
Mm,
So some of the most common symptoms that I see with mold and environmental toxins in general are things like brain fog and memory
mm,
issues, which can happen at any age. Mold causes inhalational Alzheimer's,
mhm,
which is a type of Alzheimer's dementia that can happen at any age. So it's
mm,
really, really scary. And that's a spectrum, of course. You can just feel foggy, or you can straight up start to forget things that you've always known.
Mm,
And fatigue, it saps your energy. So chronic
mhm,
fatigue, almost 100% of people with chronic fatigue, when tested, had positive mold toxins in their urine.
mhm,
Also, things like anxiety or depression or mood swings, especially if they're out of character for you. If you feel like something has changed your mood that was not situational, it could be your environment. So, gut issues, some of the things that we've been discussing already, can be caused by a mold exposure. Mold
mhm,
toxins are toxic to the gut lining, and they also cause inflammation, and the gut rules it all. So,
mhm,
then you can get histamine intolerance, you can get all sorts of gut symptoms. And then through the gut brain connection, you can get more neurologic symptoms.
mhm,
And then I do see respiratory symptoms, but I'm not even saying that's one of the most common things. But skin issues are really
mhm.
common. Things like miscellaneous rashes, things like hives. It's not one rash that you see with mold, but it is just dry skin or skin irritation. And then things like new food sensitivities can occur as well with mold, and hormone imbalances can happen because of mold, which is really not noticed by a lot of people because it doesn't seem like it would be related. So it's a wide range, but
Yeah.
if anyone is just running into walls with
Mhm.
considering what may be the cause of their symptoms, or taking things that were supposed to be helping but they're not helping, then I would look into your environment.
Yeah, I think this is so key because, you hear often, I mean, we own and run a supplement company. I say this all the time. Supplements can be incredibly helpful tools, but they are, supplements, right? They're not the whole thing. They're just a tool in the toolbox. Environment is something that's so overlooked. And so, you've got a lot of well-meaning and it's so difficult to watch, right? A lot of people are doing all the right things, even which we'll talk about molded food in a moment, but they're trying to eat well, they're eating better, they're taking supplements, they're doing all these things. And I just want to stress the importance here of you have to check your environment. And, obviously it's overwhelming. It can be super expensive. That's something that always comes up. But what are some of the first things that people can do? Do you agree and subscribe to, investing into a really high quality air filter? What are some of the things that you think make a difference?
First, I would say we need to figure out where it's coming from. So
Mhm,
it can be your home. It can also be, just want to remind people, it can also be other indoor environments. It
mhm,
can be your work, your
mhm,
school. It can be your car. It can be a past exposure that can actually cause residual symptoms.
mhm,
So figuring out if it is your home or where this exposure is coming from, if you do have a current exposure, would be a great place to start if you can do that, which would be either from some DIY tests or with mold assessment, ideally. And then once you figured out, okay, I have a mold issue in my home, maybe it was hidden because mold is often hidden. It doesn't have to be this big slab of mold on the wall like we see on the mold videos on social
mhm,
media. It can be totally hidden
mhm,
behind walls in the HVAC system, really, really common. So once you found out you have a mold issue, yeah, first thing is just to take a deep breath, because it's, not in the moldy place, but go outside and take a deep breath. Because it can be very overwhelming if, people say, okay, what am I going to do? So the number one thing that I would get would be dehumidifier.
mhm,
So keeping the moisture or the humidity below 50% ideally is key whenever you have had a mold issue in your home. And also, ventilating the space is great depending on the outdoor environment. However, air purifiers definitely help. I would say it is really important to purify the air because it's a particle count, right? Like what you're
mhm,
breathing in is going to be what your body's going to have to detox.
mhm,
So if you're not filtering your air, then your lungs are going to be the air filter. HEPA filters ideally are great to have, true HEPA filters, and then doing enough of those for your size of your space.
mhm,
So, and making sure you change those filters when needed. So, purifying and filtering the air as well, just minimizing your exposure to the area.
mhm,
So it takes some time to get things remediated or to figure out if you're going to have to move. But if there is one isolated area, if there is any way to minimize your exposure to that area, then by taping it off or anything like that, sealing it off, then that is great. Whatever is there, you're going to be breathing in, and we want to decrease the amount of toxins that you're being exposed to.
Yeah, I wanna talk for a minute here. I believe you have children as well. This is such an important topic for parents, and, again, I'm thankful for people like you who have talked about this more and more. There are so many children, and it's for many reasons. I think the diet plays another critical role in this, but there's so many children that are presenting with ADD or ADHD symptoms. This has been happening for decades now, and these poor children, sometimes as early as 6 years old, are given some sort of Adderall or Ritalin or something. And it very well could be that their environment is negatively impacting them, and mold being one of those things. So, what is some of your advice specifically for parents if their child's presenting with odd symptoms? I know this is a thing in adults. I don't know if it's a thing in children as well, but there's something called mold rage, right? Which is like this crazy mood swing we talked about earlier. What are some of the watch outs for parents specifically?
Any child with behavioral issues, I would certainly look into the environment. Something like ADHD, even autism, things like just behavioral imbalances, trouble with school, misbehaving at school, any kind of behavioral issues, we need to look at the environment
Mhm,
because mold and other toxins in the environment cause neuroinflammation. I have definitely seen kids' behaviors improve significantly whenever we address their toxin load.
mhm,
So, as you mentioned, we need to address dietary toxin load as
mhm,
well as what they're breathing in. So, at home and then at school is another issue. I know it's really common in schools as well to have a mold exposure, but we need to see, okay, to what degree is your environment
mhm.
affecting your kids' behavior so that we can address that and not just keep spinning our wheels and being frustrated and losing sleep as parents, figuring out what is going on with my child.
Another question on this, there's a couple of like common areas, right, that are very for parents, specifically young children, common areas. We've like the rubber duckies, right? Those toys that just absorb mold. We found mold in the diaper pail, right, because the humidity.
Yeah.
But are there any other just like quick tips and places that parents should be looking out for, or just toys or things that they should avoid, things that are kind of like the worst offenders for mold in a child's environment?
The water bottles that have a lot of nooks and crannies.
Mhm.
So when we were having mold issues, we had these little kids' sippy cups
Yep,
because my kids were really little at the time, and all
yep,
the nooks and crannies got so
yep,
much mold in there, and I would have to clean them constantly. And
mhm,
so not only can that be a source of mold, but it can also be a red flag that you have a mold issue because
mm,
those spores are coming from somewhere.
yep,
So mold grows easily with moisture, but it also needs an organic material to feed on. So if you have those spores, that can land there in that water bottle in those little
yeah,
nooks and crannies, then we got to figure out where that's coming from as well. So that's one of the biggest ones. So like bottles, sippy cups, anything that holds moisture easily could get moldy very, very easily. So, I mean, even something around the house, like the washing machine, really, really
mm,
commonplace to see mold, and that can contaminate everybody's clothing, and then you're wearing those clothes all day and you're breathing it in, and you
yeah,
sometimes don't see it because the toxins and the spores are invisible, so
yeah.
they're microscopic.
Water bottles, the diaper pails, these are like, they're normal things that people have in their house. I know we had a couple of those things and we've since gotten rid of them. But yeah, that's critical. And especially when they're so small, I mean, it just makes a huge impact. So changing gears a little bit, this is something we've been working a ton on, is focusing on women's health and hormone health specifically, really focusing on how the gut microbiome impacts women's hormone health through the estrobolome. And I'd love to just hear your perspective and your read on kind of how mold and some of these environmental toxins can impact hormones, specifically for women, impact men as well. But how does mold or other environmental toxins impact women's hormone health?
I'm really glad we're talking about this because it's so important and so not widely known. So
Mhm.
There are many hormonal pathways that mold toxins can interfere with. So,
Mm,
mold toxins like zearalenone, for example, they
mhm,
mimic estrogen. So, they're
mm,
estrogenic. So, they can cause worsening estrogen dominance or they can
mm,
raise your estrogen levels. So, that can cause symptoms like heavy, painful periods, mood
mm,
swings, irritability, breast tenderness, weight gain, bloating, so many different symptoms.
mm,
Even things like trouble sleeping or anxiety can be caused by estrogen dominance and that lack of balance between estrogen and progesterone.
mm,
Some other toxins like ochratoxin A which is one of the most common mold toxins, that one's going to impair your liver detox, which then creates a backup of your circulating hormones because your estrogen is supposed to be broken down in the liver. And if
mm,
those toxins are interfering with those phase one and phase two detox pathways, then your hormones just aren't getting metabolized properly. And then as far as other hormones go, mold can also disrupt your adrenal hormones. It
mm,
can disrupt your cortisol. It can disrupt your thyroid hormone pathway as well. It can block the utilization of your thyroid hormone by your
mm,
cells. So even if your thyroid hormone level is normal, then your thyroid hormone may not be able to be used properly. So then people
mm,
are getting hypothyroid symptoms and things like that. And so it's a wide reaching problem because hormones, there are hormone pathways going on all over our bodies.
mm,
So we really have to be aware of that. We really have to figure out where is this coming from so that
mhm.
we can rebalance those hormones.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic, and there's obviously a lot of, environmental impact that these different toxins have, diet has, et cetera. But it's really important, and there's so many women. You were talking about, insulin resistance and estrogen dominance, and we've looked a lot at polycystic ovarian syndrome (PCOS) and these different really painful and challenging issues that unfortunately more and more women are dealing with. They are some of the leading causes of infertility. And these issues, yes, of course, it's always helpful to take a supplement to change diet. But I think the point of this conversation, if you take away one thing, is that in addition to diet and taking supplements, et cetera, I think one of the most important things that everyone can do is address their environment.
It's so key. So, my four-part or four-pillar protocol for detox is to protect the body,
Mhm,
open the detox pathways, mobilize the toxins, and bind the toxins. So, protecting the body, we already talked about assessing and addressing your environment, starting a healing diet, so low in the high moldy foods, low in processed foods, low in your grains, which are high in
mhm,
toxins, and low in added sugars, but high in things like healthy fats, vegetables and
mhm,
the clean proteins. And then also making sure that you address the nervous system. This is very stressful, it's very overwhelming.
mhm,
And I try to take that piece out for people because I have seen many times where somebody has seen 10 or more other doctors and they're not
mhm,
healing. And I am line by lining their protocol. Okay, there's some great things that you're doing, but your body still feels like it's in fight or flight. You can't heal.
mhm.
So we have to address and calm the nervous system, and which is a daily battle.
Right.
So we have to keep out of fight or flight. And as moms and as people, people who have
Yeah.
things to do,
Yeah. It's
it's
hard.
it's hard to take a few minutes even for yourself,
Yeah.
and make sure you do either some breathing exercises or the basic nervous system exercise, or a variety of different things that you can do for your nervous system. But just to make sure that people are doing that is really important because if you don't do that and then you try to take a bunch of supplements, then whatever you're taking, it's just going to bounce off.
Mhm,
It's not going to work as well.
mhm,
And then opening the detox pathways. So back to the gut, if you're constipated, you're
mhm,
recirculating toxins. You're not
mhm,
having 1 to 2 regular bowel movements daily,
mhm.
then you're recirculating toxins 100%.
Yep.
So we have to make sure that your detox pathways are open. There's a variety of things you can do, for constipation. But it's so key. And then mobilizing the toxins. So just exercise or movement, any kind of mobilization helps, as well as making sure your lymph system isn't backed up,
Mm.
and then binding the toxins. So in all of these, I have supplements, I have protocols in my course, but I use a lot of, I use liver support, I use
Mm.
aloe, I use probiotics, I use binders and glutathione and some other supplements. But it's really important to do these things in the right order, because for example, if you try to take a bunch of glutathione and binders and say, oh, I'm just going to blast it out,
Yeah.
just going to get rid of this whole
Yeah.
mold toxin situation really quickly, no worries, it's going to backfire.
Right.
So I've seen it so many times. So, and I appreciate the go-getter mentality. Like, I'm all for that, but we need to make sure that we do it in the right order.
There are so many things that are being sold to quote unquote detox your body. I mean, it's everywhere, right? And it has been for a long time. There's like, you can remember bad infomercials from years ago. What are some of the kind of worst or just, zero efficacy behind them detox trends that you would say be weary of?
I think it's all on a spectrum,
Mhm.
because I don't do a lot of, or recommend a lot of, juice cleanse type of
Mhm.
things.
Yep.
I The only case in which I do a juice cleanse with people is sometimes for a gallbladder flush. We'll
Yep.
do like an apple juice cleanse, but other than that, it's not usually going to be something that I'm going to recommend. I think that more research needs to be done, for example, on like the EMF necklaces and other wearables, to like
Mhm.
reduce that as kind of a key component of your regimen. Like, I appreciate it, but I think that it really needs more research. And also, just as a general guideline, nothing is going to be applicable for every single person and work
That's
the same
right.
way for every single person. So people saying, like, cold plunging, for example, somebody like me, I'm a very thin,
Yeah.
petite person, like, I shouldn't cold plunge. Like, it would be bad
Yeah.
for my hormones and other things. Like, it won't go very well for me. But sauna, like, works really well for me.
Yep.
So you have to personalize it to you, I think, in all cases. So the blanket statements that, oh, this is going to work for everybody, we really need to shy away from that. If anyone's saying that, that's a huge red flag, because it has to be, even if the supplement may work for most people, it won't work for most people at the same exact dose. Like, you have to
Yep.
find the right dose for you. Like, okay, maybe you should take it with breakfast, but the other person feels better if they take it with dinner. What works for you may not work the same for the other person. So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, like when I see all these videos and people promoting stuff. um we have to make sure they're high quality ingredients, and we have to make sure we're not making any grandiose claims about, like, a one capsule at this exact time of day is going to work the same for everybody. It's just not possible.
Yeah, and I think so I mean, literally the detox doctor here, Dr. Diana. So, I mean, this is kind of core, an easy way to boil it down. Something that I explain often is there's really only a few ways to detox the body, right? It's through bowel movements, which is so critical. And that's obviously the role that the gut plays in a big way, through urinating, right? And then also through sweat. Those three things, ideally, you're doing every single day. I think you hit on a great point here of the saunas. I think that the sauna can be helpful. Is there anyone who you wouldn't recommend a sauna for, or is sauna generally kind of a two thumbs up recommendation from a detox perspective?
From a detox perspective, if you are really sensitive and have like mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, for example,
Mm.
I would say take the sauna very slow.
Mm.
Or if you know that you have really high inflammation markers, or you feel very inflamed, I would say take the sauna very slow. I've had clients who can only go in the sauna for like 2 minutes
Mm.
before they start feeling like a detox reaction. Also, if you have a really high toxin load, that can happen.
Mm.
So, but then as you go on and you get some of those toxins out, then you can go do more with it, because the studies show that 50 minutes per week is ideal, at least, to do the
Mm.
sauna for that long per week. And then As far as other couple of tips for the sauna, because I love it so much.
Yeah.
So a binder, taking a binder after you go in
Mhm.
the sauna, if
So after, not before.
after, I would take it after, like right after, because you're mobilizing the toxins, so that you can go ahead and bind those toxins
And
after they've been
and
mobilized.
for someone who doesn't know, a binder would be what?
So there are a variety of different binders. The classic is going to be something like your activated charcoal,
Yep.
or there are combo binders that have like charcoals and clays. I also love fulvic acid blends. And then probiotics are also considered in the binder category because they can help bind toxins. Not in the same way, but they do help bind some toxins.
So for anyone who's watching here, kind of the recap on detox and just something to keep in mind every day is 1 to 2 bowel movements a day is critical to your health, making sure that you're urinating enough, staying hydrated, and then sweating, which is so important. Okay, so something we all are impacted by, we cannot avoid is food, right? And diet. And so there's been more and more products, and there's a couple of categories. Coffee is one that has become more marketed as mold free coffee, which again, people weren't even thinking that there might be mold in their coffee or in their food. But let's talk about how toxins, specifically mold, toxins get into our food system, and just talk about some of kind of the uh, high level tips and tricks when you're shopping, when you're cooking, and how to make sure that you don't have mold in your food. And also, why would mold be in our food?
Yeah. So mold can contaminate food at any point during the process of it. So
Mm,
growing, storage, and then, preparing it. And it can just contaminate at any time there because, again, mold is a survivor. All it needs
mm,
is humidity, a little moisture, and an organic material to feed on. So food is perfect for mold. Mold loves to grow on food. Sometimes you can see the mold, and
yep.
sometimes it's not, the whole piece of food may not be moldy.
Mm,
However, if you see mold, for example, like on one slice of bread, then
yep.
I consider the whole loaf to be contaminated because mycotoxins can permeate throughout the entire rest of that loaf of bread, for example, and then you may not see them, but there still could be there. So I don't
Mm,
recommend, slicing very closely
yeah.
to the moldy piece and then just using the rest of it as
Oh,
if it's fine. Unfortunately, some of the worst foods for mold are going to be your grains just
mm,
because of how they're grown, how they're stored for longer than other foods. And then it's just that whole process. There's so many steps there that can get contaminated.
mm,
And then it's going to be anything that has sugar in it because mold loves to feed on sugar.
mm,
And then your pantry items, things that have a really long shelf life, have a
mm,
long time to accumulate toxins and to accumulate mold. Things with a lot of nooks and crannies, like dried fruits and things like that. And then, as you mentioned, coffee. So, those
mm,
coffee
mm,
beans, so often contaminated with toxins, even if you don't see mold on them, which you wouldn't really often see mold there, but
yeah.
can still be contaminated with those invisible toxins. So I really can't even personally drink, mainstream coffee anymore
Mm,
because it tastes just toxic to me.
mm,
So there are lots of brands that are tested for toxins now, thankfully. And
mm,
then as far as some tips there, I would say, ideally fresh foods, are going to be
yep.
better than your pantry items for mold. And then if you can buy local whenever you can, that
Mm,
will reduce that time in that supply chain,
yep.
and that will reduce the time in which it could be contaminated. And then just to choose, healthier options. Peanuts are actually really bad for mold too, just to
Mm,
throw that in there. So, unfortunately,
yeah.
so a lot of we talk about families, a lot of kids love peanut products. So, as far as the lower toxin diet, so I say at least while you're actively detoxing from a mold exposure, for example, I have people limit their grain intake, not
Mm,
have it be the staple, the bottom of the food pyramid for people. So substitutes are potatoes.
mm,
They're better than grains for toxins.
yep.
So they're a great substitute. And things like almonds are better than peanuts, for
Mm,
example, like almond butter or almond flour products. And then, lots of fruits and vegetables. We
yep,
mentioned, mold and sugar. And yes, mold grows on fruit commonly, but, also fruit has a lot of health benefits. So
mhm,
making sure that we get, some fresh fruits in, especially low sugar fruits like berries and citrus, and
mm,
then lots of vegetables, because vegetables, like for example, the sulforaphanes in your cruciferous vegetables and broccoli really help with detox, for
mm,
example. And then, lots of other vegetables like kale can function as a binder.
yep,
Cabbage can be a binder and so good for the gut. So, lots of vegetables have some really great qualities when it comes to helping with your detox. So, food as medicine is huge. And hydration, just
yep,
with regard to what water are you drinking, because water can be contaminated too.
yep,
So getting a good water filter that filters out mycotoxins, or that says, that it filters out toxins instead of just a regular filter, and not, drinking out of plastic if possible.
yep,
So there's all these choices that we make, hundreds of choices as it pertains to food and drink on a daily basis, but even one simple swap can go a long way, like just
yeah,
saying, okay, I'm going to swap out my plastic water bottles for drinking out of this filtered water that's filtered for toxins, can just make you feel so much better, and these positive changes really add up.
totally. There's 2 other, I think, really, again, these are these simple lifestyle staples, but that have a direct impact on detoxification and, again, hormone health, overall, whether you're struggling with bloating or weight gain, all of these things. One is sunlight and vitamin D, and I wanted you to just talk about the connection of, mold and toxin exposure to vitamin D levels, because this is something also I think not enough people understand, that having these toxins in your body directly impacts your vitamin D levels. And of course, vitamin D is a hormone that's essential.
So, mold decreases your vitamin D levels. Mold
Mhm,
disrupts vitamin D, and vitamin D is a hormone, so it's not just any vitamin.
mhm,
And it's so key to keep those vitamin D levels up, because it affects your energy, it affects your mood, it
yep,
affects your metabolism. So, I love to recommend for people to get sunlight, morning sunlight on a daily
mhm,
basis, if at all possible. And that sunlight has to hit the eyes at that positive angle, it has to hit the
mhm,
retina at that certain angle, so that it can have that impact and help
mhm,
with your vitamin D production. And it can also help your circadian rhythm, of course, if you get that sunlight on in the morning. So,
mhm,
especially on a daily basis, if you can. Magnesium is also disrupted by mold. It's
mhm,
low in most people. So, I love to supplement magnesium because it's so, so important as well for your relaxation, for
mhm,
over 500 chemical reactions in the body that magnesium takes a part of. So,
mhm.
all of these different vitamin, nutrient, hormone levels can all be disrupted by environmental toxin exposure and inflammation. And just getting those back in check can give people their lives back.
So let's talk about sleep and the importance of sleep, with detoxification. This is something also, I mean, I wish someone would have told me this in my early 20s when I was sleeping, 5, 6 hours a night. Now, I mean, outside of like the newborn, stage, which obviously that's a whole different world. But outside of that, I mean, one of the top things that I prioritize every day is sleeping for at least 8 to 9 hours, because I've noticed this huge difference.
So, our brains flush out toxins at night, but only while we sleep,
Mhm,
because there's the glymphatic system in the cerebrospinal fluid that flushes out toxins, and it's 6 times more active. Our
mhm,
detoxification systems are 6 times more active while we're sleeping. So, if you can dial your sleep in, you are going to get 6 times the detox potential
mhm,
that you would if you're not able to sleep. So, a few things that people may not realize is that, eating right before bed is not doing you
mhm,
any good. So, if you can push that back, the ideal time frame is actually 4 hours, to finish eating at least 4 hours before bedtime, because then your migratory motor complex can move through and can start digesting things in the right way and not be backed up while you're sleeping. And also, whenever you're sleeping, your body can focus on things like detox and repair. The sleep is not supposed to be a time when you're actively digesting something that you
Mhm.
just ate. It's supposed to be a
Mhm.
time for repair and for processing of the day and for renewal. Also, I would say just your circadian rhythm, doing the things that we've mentioned a little bit already, like trying to dial in that morning light so
Mhm.
that your body doesn't get confused, but not a lot of light at nighttime.
Mhm.
So the red light only at nighttime. In my house, we
Yep.
actually have separate lamps that
So
have
do we.
just
We do
red light
too.
bulb.
Yep,
So
they're great. We've
it
got
may
them.
look a little bit,
It's
yeah,
awesome.
it
I'd
may look
highly
a little bit
recommend that.
unintuitive.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So no, blue light or
Yep.
even white light at night, especially the overhead light, because again,
Yep.
it really matters that angle at which it hits your eyes.
Mhm.
So if you're gonna use any light, then lower is better as far as the angle goes that it hits your eyes. Things like sleep supplements. We mentioned magnesium. I like amino acids, sometimes like
Mhm.
L-theanine or GABA, some things like that. Of course, there's melatonin. For bedtime, chamomile, other, lavender, other things that can be useful for relaxation. So dialing in your sleep is really, really huge. So I
Mhm.
think, that's definitely one of the first things that I talk to people about because again, it can really, really magnify your healing if you can just sleep.
Well, and that's obviously if you have struggled with, mold and you're trying to detox from that, but that's just in general detoxing from anything and just the stress of the day. I didn't know that there's a 6x impact on detoxification while you're sleeping. And then also, right, the brain plays a huge role in the detox of the brain itself while you're sleeping. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It flushes out toxins. Circulating toxins can get into your brain. These
Yeah.
toxins are microscopic. They can cross the blood brain barrier. They can go into your brain. They can cause inflammation. They can cause nerve damage. And then you can't think. You can't process information. You can't function at a high level. You can't remember things. You have this brain fog, cognitive issues, all sorts of issues, mold rage. And
Mhm.
that can all come down to the brain and circulating toxins for sure.
What is just one more time we touched on it briefly, but what is mold rage exactly?
Rage is basically episodes of intense rage that are generally out of character and that can come out of nowhere and are often related to a mold exposure. This
Wow.
can be an acute thing, like if you go into a building and are sensitive to mold, then you can feel it come on quickly, or it could be something that comes and goes if you're living in a highly, mold infested place, and it can ruin relationships. It
Mm.
can just cause all kinds of terrible situations. And it's like it's not you, it's the mold, but it's hard to really tease that out for people,
Yeah.
for people because, you're going through it and you don't know what exactly is causing it, maybe, or you don't know what
Mm.
part was because of the mold. And then it gets just so complicated and just so distressing and destructive, really.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you the power of the environmental toxins on your body and how hard your body is working against them and how unnatural it is. So, just kind of in closing here, there's so much information flying around on the internet. There's people every day recording, thousands and thousands of conversations like this one. And I think net, most of it's very positive, right? Net. But what are some of the worst pieces of advice out there right now, or things that you think are just kind of almost destructive, or that people should be wary of?
I think the biggest thing is to take it all in context. Like if you
Mhm.
say, okay, just take a probiotic. Like I love probiotics and I love
Yep.
what you guys are doing with probiotics. But we have to figure out, okay, when should I take it versus
Yep.
the other person? And things like, oh, just go do this, take this glutathione or take these
Yep.
binders. Is it the right time for you? Or, is it the right dose for you or things like that? Like you have to think about what, start low and go
Mhm.
slow, I guess I
Yep.
would say, for any kind of, if you decide to try out anything that you hear about on the internet, just start low and go slow. Figure out what dose is right for you and when it's right for you to take it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point too. I mean, with the probiotics, it's so confusing. There's many different strains. Every strain, has ideally you're picking out a strain that has clinical support, and you really need to research and look at what are you looking to achieve from the product. First of all, is it high quality? There's spore formers versus non-spore forming products, obviously, and not every product's right for everyone. There's no one size fits all with any supplement. There's really a ton of different variables going on, particularly for women, whether it's within the vaginal microbiome or just that connection within hormones and how hormones impact the gut. But it is true that there's different products for different times of your life and for different need states, etc. So great advice there. Thank you so much for all of your time. I know this is going to be helpful to so many people, and this is hopefully going to continue to educate and open everyone's eyes to things that they can be doing. And hopefully, again, help people get to the root cause, right? Whether that's the gut or whether it's an exposure to a toxin or all of the above. So, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to staying in touch. And yeah, check out Dr. Diana's work, and you will find her on socials.